Hello, everybody. Same Game Rig here. And because I'm pretty sure we have a podcast tonight, I figured I'd get my first impressions out the way in advance so you guys had something to watch in case you didn't want to watch the podcast. Link to the podcast in the description or on my website, which will also be in the description. So I've had the Switch for 3 days, and I've primarily played Breath of the Wild while going in and out with Bomberman. Just quick thing on Bomberman, Hearted. That is surprisingly a tough game. But then again, I've never played Bomberman before, so that could be partially it. But that's not what we came here for. What we came here for is to talk about Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild, and I think this video means more. Will probably mean more than other videos because I'm not a Legend of Zelda fan. I didn't start trying to play Zelda until maybe 2 years ago, and as of now, I still have yet to beat a Zelda game. And I just want to kind of talk from my perspective and how I feel about Breath of the Wild so far. And the way I'm going to start this, and this is it might be what I call the video actually. If you like Xenoblade Chronicles X, you'll probably like Breath of the Wild. I swear that was the first. I think it wasn't until today it clicked for me. That's what this game feels like for me. It feels like Xenoblade Chronicles X, but like as a mechanical sequel. Like gameplay mechanics, it feels like a sequel because it plays very similarly. And it wasn't like last night, for example. This isn't really that much of a spoiler, but there are these towers you have to unlock. You have to climb up and activate so you can get a full view of the map, and then it shows you labels and names of places and shit, which is cool. And then I said, why does this feel very familiar where I'm sneaking around certain enemies that I can't fight yet, or I don't have the weapons to? Like, I'm doing all this ducking and diving, climbing up walls and shit. I'm like, why does this seem so familiar? I'm like, oh, because I did it 2 years ago. It was probably been a year, honestly. I did it a year ago while playing Xenoblade. Xenoblade had me doing the same kind of shit, where it was like, oh, you have to activate all these, what are they called? Probes. I think they were the probes. You had to activate all these data probes, and it was the same thing. Not every probe was just easily available. You had to go out of your way to get to them. Now, granted, there's nowhere near as many data probes as there is there's nowhere near many towers as there is data probes, but it kind of reoccurred this ongoing theme of how this game reminds me a lot of Xenoblade Chronicles X, which isn't too surprising, especially considering the nature of the game. And on top of that, Monolith Soft developers helped make the game. And it makes perfect sense why they're the ones who helped make the game. Because holy shit, it feels very similar in certain aspects. I guess to talk about the reason why I never got into Zelda before is because for me, Zelda felt clunky. I know, and that's blasphemy for other people. But for me, the older Zeldas felt clunky because of the way they controlled. Forgot the fact that Link didn't start jumping until this year confuses me to all hell. Even though I still don't think it's a great jump, but it makes sense in the context of the game. And it wasn't like the other games weren't built around him not jumping. But it felt like you limited the control of the player for the sake of creating interesting level design when you could have just made Link as capable as any other character and then made level design based around his capabilities. Both situations work, but for me, it just didn't feel. It felt a little bit more jarring. And also to me, Zelda became it felt way more focused on puzzles than it did on anything else. And I don't know, it always felt like I was just going to one puzzle to another puzzle. And like when I played Wind Waker HD, so that was my issue. So Breath of the Wild, ironically enough, feels like a breath of fresh air for someone who really didn't get into the normal Zelda formula. Just to talk about a few other things, graphics, because I know everyone's going to bring it up. I think the game looks best when there's not really much sun showing. I think the art style they chose works in the majority of situations. It just doesn't work when the sun is beating down on the character, on Link. Because when the sun is beating down on Link, you look at it and you're like, and that's when the issues with the shadows and some of the textures look rough. But when you're in the rain, when it's even cloudy at night, the game looks absolutely gorgeous. Hell, even at sunrise, the shit looks great. It looks great, I would argue, 50 to 75% of the time. But when it's just a normal sunny day is when it looks its absolute worst. And that's only just because the graphic in that thing in the Shadows engine, that's what kind of shows is that yeah, it's not perfect, and there's obviously some issues with the shadow and anti-aliasing and all that other shit. But in a lot of sequences that you wouldn't expect to look good, look really fucking good. It's the worst things to me are just the normal. I'm walking out on a sunny day, and shit, I can see like the shadow clipping, and it's not high. It's not super high res shadows on the wall when you're walking past them and shit. Like those kind of things. But like for example, when you go to the Zora's domain, it's like, oh my god, it's raining, and you're just like, holy shit. The reflection, like the shit looked great. There's a few pictures I took that I'll probably be posting on Twitter at some point in the future. That's the other problem. Talking about this game is hard because you can't talk about spoilers because there's a lot of people who either haven't beat the game or haven't experienced the same stuff as you. And it's hard. But I did want to talk about a few things that I thought were very, very interesting. It wasn't, and I'll be honest, it wasn't until I got into a particular fight that made me realize the importance of learning the battle mechanics. A lot of people won't really, when you run into Breath of the Wild, you wouldn't think you need to learn battle mechanics. Because the first few fights are just literally run up to an enemy and hit the attack button 6 times. There's no reason to do any dodges or parries or any of that shit. There are things in the game, but you don't really have to do them for the majority of like the small fights. It's not until you start fucking until you get off the Great Plateau and you start messing with some of the harder enemies in the game that it's like, oh my god, why am I not using Flurry Rush? Why am I not back dodging or side hopping and shit? Why am I not using half of these abilities or parry? Because you'd be surprised, some of these other enemies you can't just run up and hit 3 times. And it's also because of the invincibility frames. I like how in mid-fight, depending on what kind of weapon you're using, depends on whether or not you're able to knock an enemy down or not. And that's important because if you can knock an enemy down in the middle of an attack, you can stop them from retaliating, and you could possibly knock the weapon out of their hands. And most of the standard enemies like bokoblins can't attack you unless they have a weapon in their hands. I think are they called Stalfos or the ones that look like lizards that can camouflage? Those can attack you with their tongues, and then I also like the fact that you're not even talking about the elemental elements. How you can freeze enemies with ice arrows. And I also like the full friendly fire damage. The one thing I couldn't stand in certain games is that some games are like, oh, well, your enemy and the enemies are all cool with each other, so regardless if the enemy shoots a projectile, the enemy doesn't take any fucking hits. That's bullshit. You shot a fucking blast, I shouldn't be the only one getting damaged in that. I like the friendly fires here. It also, because it makes things very interesting. Lightning strikes are scary as shit, side note. I'm going to be jumping all over the place. I'm not going to go through anything spoiler heavy because I'll be honest with you, I haven't done that much story. Well, I kind of haven't done that much story stuff. I say kind of because I've deviated a lot, but I haven't, but I've also been doing just basic shit like shrines and activating towers. I'm the kind of guy who kind of like doing a combination of both. And I'll try to do the main path, but I'll veer off every once in a while just to see. It's crazy and it was crazy because me and the Juices podcast crew were talking in like a chat, and like they're doing shit that I completely missed. It wasn't until I started doing plot stuff that I turned around and went, wait a minute, there's like 3 other beginning areas I could have fucked with that I did nothing with because I just went off into one different damn direction. And last night, I was like, well. And I haven't found this yet. I don't know if this is a thing, so it's not a spoiler because I don't know. But I was also trying to figure out what everything's important for. Like, the cooking system is cool. I like the different effects you can get, and it pays attention to read, folks. You know, you might want to read this shit. I know people don't like reading in video games, but here it makes a lot of sense. It also has other Xenoblade-like elements to it. Like, you can take pictures. It's slightly different than, like, Xenoblade. Xenoblade kind of... As soon as you encounter an enemy, it was already in your book, and you kind of had to, and you could just look back to it. Here, you're actively taking pictures of enemies and items and shit that you can use as your own personal scrapbook for where you can and cannot find them for later when you need to harvest parts or you need to grind for certain items to get certain weapons. Now, I haven't run across the thing that allows you to get more weapons through item parts. I don't know how much of a thing it is, although one of the items does mention crafting. if that's a thing, I don't know where it is. I'm very curious. I like the cool differences in outfits you can get, and the different effects. And it's crazy. It's almost like every time I turn a fucking corner, I'm half scared because I don't know what I'm dealing with. Oh, side note, beat my first Guardian last night. That shit was great. It's the most satisfying fucking thing to do, especially and that's also why I like the whole differences in weapons and what certain weapons can do. I don't want to. The experience was goat. It's like, and it's weird because this game has like RPG like elements without actually being an RPG. But it's like that moment where you sit down and you're like, wait a minute, I can run off into this direction, and if I use this particular weapon in this particular situation, I can get a different result than using a different weapon. So it encourages experimentation. So I'm running around. So I got the Xenoblade element of running around searching for new places and new towers to climb and new areas to fucking connect to. And at the same time, I'm also like, well, I can't level up, but I can increase the amount of hearts I have and the amount of it's weird. It's like it has RPG elements without fully being an RPG, because it's not like Link himself changes, but you can augment everything else. So his outfits can have certain levels of defense. His total outfit, his shoes, no, pants, shirt, and you can wear like a hood or a hat, can all have different varying levels of defense or resistances, which makes it very interesting about what clothes you want to wear in certain situations. Certain outfits give him special abilities. I'm not gonna spoil it, but there's a particular one I got that is fun as fuck to use, and I was like, you know what? And see, I'm thinking, oh, it's only gonna be useful in this one area. I'm like, wait a minute, I could use this anywhere, and it's great. The paraglider's fun as fuck. It is super satisfying to beat enemies, which I didn't think it would be, because as someone who likes RPGs, I kind of like the physical reward of I gain level ups and then I gain a new ability through the level up. Here, the reward you're getting is beating the enemy and getting their shit. Because when you steal their shit, usually tougher enemies have stronger weapons that you can then use to beat up even stronger enemies and get even stronger weapons that take longer to break. And honestly, I appreciate, and honestly, I would say try to get into at least one or two tough battles, particularly because it'll help you kind of adjust yourself to fighting, to learning the mechanics. I think the dodge and parry system and the flurry rush and the jump up slow-mo shit, that is imperative for future fights, and you need to keep that on toes. And I also start understanding the point of having these smaller fights. Because you think you're fighting these bokoblins, well, you have no reason to, because the only thing you get from them is maybe weapons and items, but it's not like you're leveling up. It's not like you're going to increase the heart containers. The most you'll get from them is like a fucking sword, their body parts, and that's actually, I think that's it. And maybe like some elemental shit, like something on the ground or whatnot. Although you could find that literally anywhere. So the only reason so you would think, oh, well, there's not any real reason to do that. But the point of doing that is not only to get you used to the battle mechanics, but it's also because of the various different levels of interaction you have with certain enemies it's crazy because some of these enemies have like their own little quirks and patterns and shit. I took a picture. You have like one of these small bokoblins talking to like one of these moblins, and they're just having this little weird little conversation, sitting down, looking at each other, and you can tell, and the one's making all these hand gestures and movements and shit, and you're like, huh, there's like a fucking ecosystem there, and it's like, it makes the world feel fleshed out. Like the biggest problem you always had in other games is that like these animals and creatures would be around, but like you would never see them interacting, so it never felt like a world. It didn't feel as fully fleshed out as a world because other animals would interact with other animals. Which is one thing I really give the game credit for. This thing has insanely well done, insanely well crafted AI, and insanely well crafted physics engine. I don't play this many open world games, so I'm not going to sit out here and make a bold claim like this thing has the best physics engine ever or the best AI ever. That's subjective, and it also depends on what games we're talking about here. But I wouldn't be surprised if this was on the higher end of AI and physics engines based development, because the shit is ridiculous. The amount of stuff you can get away with doing, things that wouldn't even make sense, and then the fact that some of these puzzles are open ended. Like for example, the ball puzzle that people mentioned in one of the shrines. you can beat that two different ways. The way they suggest you beat it is it's in like a maze and you're using the motion controls to guide the ball out of the maze and then make it over to the next platform so it rolls down and unlocks the door so you can beat the shrine. And I realized, like, wait a minute, if you flip your controller, and I'm no bullshit, I flip my controller upside down so it's the back of that damn platform that's just a flat edge. The ball drops on it, and it's now just an easy, you roll back and you roll forward to roll it in there, and you're like, that wouldn't have worked. Most Zelda games wouldn't have done that. Most Zelda games would have said you have to do it through the maze. This game's like, you know what, fuck it. If you want to flip it over and do it that way, that's perfectly fine. It's up to you, but you're the one playing, buddy. You're the one making the rules. It's crazy. And then on top of the fact that, like, the plateau, you can't get all the Great Plateau until you get all the stasis abilities, means that every shrine that you go into, you have the ability to beat. That's the one thing about open worlds that's great. You could technically, especially a well done open world, is that you could technically tackle anything in that world because the beginning area sets you up to do that. Because I have to, and I wonder if there was a way to cheese the Great Plateau if you wanted to. I'm pretty sure if I look up speedruns in the future within the next year or so, I'm pretty sure people will find ways, but I'm curious if there was ways to glitch out the game in which, because nothing in this game is fucking required to do. That's what kills me. The only thing I think that's required to do is the stuff in the beginning with the Great Plateau. Other than that, you ain't got to do really shit else. Everything else is optional. Which is what makes the game so fun and interesting. Because now it's not a question of you have to do these things to beat the final boss. It's, do you want to do them? And when you give me the ability to choose, which is what players always talk about, player choice, that's what makes the game open up. Because the game only opens up as much as you want it to. So if you don't want the game to last 16, 40 hours, you ain't got to do that. But you just got to struggle a little bit harder when you go up to the damn final boss. Man. There's like a lot of different elements, but I think the reason why I've enjoyed this game as much as I have is primarily because it reminds me of Xenoblade so much. It plays very similar to Xenoblade, has a lot of elements, while it's way more advanced than others, like the cooking system, for example. That shit is way more cooking elements, whether it's, winds, ice, harsh winds, rain, thunderstorms, lightning strikes, all these different things. And then the stamina meter makes everything. I kind of like the switching of weapons, particularly because it allows me to get versatile and see what weapons have different effects and how it's so important to get stronger weapons. And how certain weapons can be changed depending on the environment. Like you can light your fucking bokoblin clubs on fire and beat enemies and cause fire damage. There's a lot of shit. There's a lot of shit. That's how I can put it. But I think so far I've enjoyed it. I haven't. If you want to know how many shrines I've done probably a little bit over, probably like 16, maybe 17. Because I've gotten at least 4 upgrades, so about 16 shrines I've done. It's fun, dude. It's fun. And as I said, if you like Xenoblade Chronicles X, that's the closest game I can compare it to. That will almost, I'm not gonna say automatically, and also a lot of people are like, oh, all these fucking giant gaps in land space. I haven't really sweated it that much, particularly because you gave me a horse. You've given me a horse, you've given me fast travel. For the most part, I ain't got to deal with, if I don't like roaming giant areas, you know what I can do? I go there once and then I can fast travel for the future. Or I can use a horse. And there's like this horse meta that you can get into about breeding. not breeding, but registering stronger and more resilient horses and shit. There's all these little metas in the game that you don't have to deal with, but you can. You can shield surf, so you don't have to necessarily there's so many ways of tackling almost any situation in this game, and it's a baffling thing to me, because you would think that's the hardest thing to do, is to create a game that like anybody can kind of play and have a completely different experience. But I don't call this game a masterpiece, because to me, I want to beat the game and experience all I want to experience before I say that. But it's very appealing, and I agree with the sentiment that if you didn't like Zelda before, this game might be a good way of changing your mind. Because let's say you don't like stories in Zelda. Well, for the most part, you can kind of skip it. I mean, like realistically, you ain't got to do any of this shit. It's all up to you to what you want to do. But yeah, I'm liking the game so far. I don't know how many hours I'm into it. I would probably say I'm somewhere between like 15 and 20 if I had to take a shot in the dark. That may not even be an accurate representation because there is no fucking playtime. Although I think I can look that up on that parental app, but I haven't downloaded it yet because I don't have kids, so I don't need to. But yeah, that is some good stuff. Anywho, I think I'm gonna go to the gym and probably play some Zelda before the podcast starts tonight. Well, actually, gym, shower, then I'll go play Zelda before the podcast starts tonight. So, thank you guys for watching. Leave your thoughts and comments in the comment section below. Tell me how the Wii U version of Zelda is if you have it, or tell me if you're interested in Zelda or if the Xenoblade reference makes it more appealing to you. Yeah, life's a game. Play to win, and I will catch you guys later. Peace.